Hello, everybody. This is Ralph Martin from rjqualityconsulting.com. And in this video, I want to talk about ISO 9001 calibration requirements. Right now, I'm on my latest blog post entitled ISO 9001 Calibration Requirements, Essential Guidelines for Quality Management. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, you can go ahead and go down to the description box, and there's a link there for my latest blog post, and you can read all of the details concerning the ISO 9001 calibration requirements. But what I'd like to do is go over what those actual requirements are and how you would go about meeting those requirements. Really, it doesn't matter what your organization does. There is a calibration requirement, and if you're on this video, you're most likely interested in learning what the ISO 9001 calibration requirements are. So in this particular blog article, I do talk about the requirements. I have a calibration is key to many types of equipment. We do ask, or ISO 9001, the standard requires that companies keep good records of their calibration work and that they need to choose the right methods and follow a set of procedures. And in this video, I'm going to give you some examples of some of the documentation requirements that the standard requires, and also where these requirements actually reside in the standard so that you understand what the requirements actually are. So if you go down this particular blog article, I have a video talking about the calibration requirements specifically. This video itself will also be on this blog post once I finish it here. The importance of calibration really, is to ensure measurement accuracy of your measurement equipment, and also to meet customer requirements, to comply obviously with regulations, and really to reduce errors and waste, and just to ensure that the equipment that you're using, that you are using to measure results that are in line with whatever it is you're manufacturing or producing, whether that be test results if you're providing a service to your customer, or if you are providing a product that has certain requirements that you need to measure and you're using measurement devices in order to get those measurements. Calibration really doesn't apply to all equipment. It only applies to equipment that gives a measurement result. So the requirement of the standard is actually under a section called measurement traceability, which we'll get into a little later. And that's what I talk about in this next section here, calibration and traceability. Really, calibration really is all about measurement traceability and tracing measurement results to some sort of standard. If you have a third-party calibration service come out to your facility to do the calibration on your equipment for you, they will do a service. They'll calibrate your equipment, check it to make sure it functions properly and gives accurate results, and then leave you with some sort of calibration certificate, which is what you would need to keep in-house. Unless you are an organization that does in-house calibration, where you're taking your measurement results of the equipment and then comparing them to some sort of reference standard that is traceable to the SI units through NIST. And as most of you know, I am a certified ISO 17025 auditor, so I know a thing or two about calibration. The testing and calibration laboratories are required to be under another ISO program known as ISO 17025, which is a calibration and testing standard. And further on down, you could read all of the requirements for calibration here. ISO 9001 sets out several requirements, and they're basically, you need to identify all the equipment that you have at your facility that needs calibration, that you create some sort of calibration schedule, that you use qualified personnel for calibrations, whether that be an outside source, a vendor, or in-house. Keep detailed records of all the calibration, and in this video I'm going to show you some examples of what some of this documentation would look like. And then the equipment itself needs to be labeled with a calibration date and then a calibration due date. That is also a requirement of the standard. And that you also must protect equipment from damage that could perhaps invalidate these calibration results. You want to make, like for example, you want to make sure balances aren't in the laboratory that are susceptible to being bumped off the counter or the lab bench or something like that, and that they're not susceptible to being damaged or invalidated in some way. And that your process should include steps for handling out of calibration equipment, meaning that you take them out of service if they don't perform calibrations correctly, or you label them or quarantine them, something like an out of service labeling tag on the equipment, or literally take them out of service and quarantine them in another area so they don't accidentally get used. So that is also a requirement of the standard. What I'd like to do now is go right to the standard itself, and the ISO 9001 standard under section 7.1.5 is where the ISO 9001 calibration requirements reside. So under monitoring and measuring resources, under the general requirements, the organization shall determine and provide resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results. The organization shall ensure that the resources are provided and are suitable for specific type of monitoring and measurement activities, and that they are maintained to ensure continuing fitness for the purpose. So you may have equipment in your operations that might not be considered measuring equipment, but you are required to make sure that they are maintained properly and that they do function. And then, of course, the big one is the organization shall retain appropriate documented information as evidence of fitness for purpose of the monitoring and measurement resources. So there is some required documentation here. And again, I'll go over what some of that looks like. The real heart of calibration lies in section 7.1.5.2 under the section of measurement traceability. And really there are three major requirements here. Basically, when measurement traceability is a requirement, meaning you have a piece of equipment that generates a result. This could be a balance, this could be a pipette, this could be a thermometer, it could be calipers, it could be a gauge block, anything that gives you a measurement result. That's where it's a requirement. Measurement traceability is a requirement and is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results that you're providing, whether it be results for the product that you are manufacturing and you have results that you need to determine before they get delivered to your customer. The requirements, this measurement equipment shall, and these are shall statements. Anytime you have a shall statement in a standard, it literally means you shall do that. Not, if you want to, these are shall statements. Okay. So measuring equipment shall be calibrated or verified at, or both, right, at specified intervals or prior to use. So if you have a piece of measurement equipment and you're implementing it, it needs to be calibrated or verified that it works prior to you putting it into operation. And that needs to be measured against some sort of measurement standard. Uh, for example, in the case of a balance, you could measure it against reference weights. Make sure 1 gram weight equals 1 gram, and that when you put it on a balance, it is 1 gram plus or minus whatever the measurement uncertainty of that particular reference weight is, which you'll know from the certificate of analysis of the reference weights. You'll also need to identify in order to determine their status. So these need to be identified, how often they should be calibrated, for example. And measurement equipment needs to be identified on some sort of equipment or measurement equipment log. So the auditor is going to want to see, which equipment, what equipment are you calibrating? You need to have that determined on some sort of calibration log. Oftentimes, if they see you using a piece of measuring equipment and it's not on the log, you'll typically get a nonconformance. And then you also, again, I mentioned this before, but C is to be safeguarded from adjustments, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status. And then finally, the organization shall determine if the validity of previous measurement results have been adversely affected when measurement equipment is found to be unfit. So if you determine, for example, let's say on a balance, you take a 1 gram reference weight and it doesn't weigh 1 gram, indicating that there might be a problem with your balance. You would want to take that balance out of service and determine that it hasn't affected results that you have previously used. So what that means is you would need to write a nonconformance, taking the balance out of operation, and then you would need to do some sort of investigation to determine if this, how, number one, how long has it been out of calibration? What measurement results were taken during the time it wasn't functioning properly? And then determine whether these results have been found and what you're going to do about it. So that would be part of the non-conforming process. You went back, you found out that you had 10 results, but these results were not sent to a customer, or there was no product delivered to the customer that had been impacted, and you would put that on your nonconformance report. Or you might find yourself in a situation where you have to notify the customer, hey, I think we sent you some bad measurement results because our balance was out of calibration at the time that we performed that measurement. So these are things that are required. So that being said, I'd like to show you a couple of examples of required documentation. First of all, you want to make sure that you have a calibration really procedure. So here's an example of a control of calibrated equipment procedure that my company provides for clients. If you ever want a calibrated equipment procedure, we can do that for you. So this would be in the table of contents here. This would be an example of a procedure for the control of calibrated equipment. We have a process activity map. It's always good when you have procedures for ISO 9001 that you have a process activity map that shows the inputs and the outputs, because there is an input and output requirement for ISO 9001, and these charts do meet the requirements of that. So, we have what are we doing it with? We're doing it with calibrated equipment log. We use calibration labels, and we use calibration certificates in the case of using vendors to calibrate our equipment. We have input, can be customer requirements, regulatory requirements, and some sort of calibration schedule that we're adhering to at the organization. And how do we do this? We do it by following our calibration process. There may be some specifications and standards, forms and reports and work instructions. The activity is the calibration itself, which could be performed by a third-party vendor, or it could be done in-house using a reference standard of some sort. We talked about that in the case of using a balance, using reference weights. With who, production team, quality inspector, or quality manager may be responsible for your quality or for your calibration program. Calibrated equipment is the output, measurement traceability, continual improvement, and conforming process with what measure, on-time calibration, and calibration status. So this is an example of a calibration procedure that outlines what we need to do as far as documentation. We want to make sure we identify the item to be calibrated, what the manufacturer model number is, and I'll show you what this looks like on a form or a calibration log. These are who is responsible in the organization for calibration, existing devices, or if we're taking new devices in, what the calibration frequency is. Sometimes people will ask what that is. A lot of times that could be determined by the manufacturer of the equipment, or it could be determined by your organization itself. How often do you think your measuring equipment needs to be calibrated based on the data? And then we have calibration due date. And oftentimes, just to let you know, calibration frequency, oftentimes for good practices and best practices, typically once a year for items such as balances, pipettes, calipers, things like that. Some measurement equipment like thermometers are done every 2 years. So general rule of thumb, 1 year to 2 year calibration frequencies. Then we have, again, like I mentioned, you do have to have calibration labels affixed to the calibration equipment, indicating what the calibration date is and when the next due date is. Auditors will catch you on that. So you want to make sure measurement equipment has these dates associated with them. And then if you're outsourcing calibration, you want to make sure that you have a calibration certificate on file for that particular piece of equipment in addition to the calibration label. So moving on, let me show you what a calibration log would look like. Here's an example of a calibration log. You want to have a log like this that identifies each of the pieces of measurement equipment in your organization that you use to determine measurement results that impact the product you're delivering to your customer. So if you use calipers to measure something while you're in the manufacturing process, calipers should be on this calibration log. If you use balances to weigh things prior or during the manufacturing process, you want to put the balance on this log. All of the measuring equipment that is used in the process would be listed. You would want to put the manufacturer of the piece of equipment. There's just an example here for a digital sound meter. What the model is, maybe some sort of equipment ID number or serial number or an in-house asset number, however you identify the piece of equipment. That could be pretty flexible, depends on how you identify your equipment. What the date you put into service, this could be non-applicable if it's grandfathered in or something like that. If it is a calibration performed by an outside vendor, then you want the calibration certificate number and make sure that that calibration certificate is retrievable when the auditor asks you for it. What is the calibration interval? You could say annually, we talked about that, or every 2 years, whatever the case may be. When the date of the last calibration was performed to make sure it's current, whether it passed or failed the calibration, when the next calibration due date is, and the calibration standard that you're using. That could be a reference standard that in some cases could be non-applicable, but some sort of standard. It could be the operations manual of the piece of equipment. This could be pretty much, whatever you determine it to be. So this is an example of a calibration log. Now, another piece of documentation you'll need if you do a software validation. One of the things that the standard does require is if, for example, you have measurement equipment that utilizes software and you need to make sure that you track the version of that software or firmware that's associated with those measurement results. Some balances, for example, have software built into them and they update the software version. This could be with big pieces of equipment like mass spectrometers or things that have software utilized with them. A lot of the gas chromatographs and pieces of equipment like that use software, and you want to track that software version, and then you can keep track of that. And if it's an in-house piece of software that has been developed by your organization, you want to make sure you have done a validation, that you have the validation date, who validated it, and any comments. If this is a commercial off-the-shelf type of software, then validation may not be applicable. So this would be only for in-house software validation that maybe your IT department has performed. So this is kind of a piece of document that you would use for software validation if applicable to your organization. The other thing you want to do is have a equipment maintenance log. There are pieces of equipment that you might use in-house that is not a measurement device. So it doesn't give you a result, but you need to maintain the piece of equipment. And there is a requirement that you maintain your equipment and that you have an equipment maintenance log. And this could be used for that. You have the manufacturer of the equipment, model number, asset or serial number, the supplier, who's maintaining the equipment, whether that be in-house or you're farming that out to the manufacturer who comes out and maintains it, say once a year or whatever, location in your facility, warehouse A, whatever, date of the last maintenance performed, what the maintenance interval is, and when the next maintenance due date is. Um, you notice that there's two logs, one for measurement equipment and one for equipment. So it's a good idea that you keep these logs separate. So those are the documentation requirements for ISO 9001. So we have the 9001 requirements, which really is, as far as documentation requirements, is a procedure, a equipment maintenance log like this one, and a measurement equipment calibration log, and if applicable, a software validation log. Go ahead and read all the details of the article. I go into a lot of detail on calibration requirements for ISO 9001. There's not a whole mess of requirements. It's pretty simple. Really, you look at the standard and you really, in general, you have about 5 requirements. So one of the things that I always encourage businesses to do when they start questioning what the requirements of things are is to go right to the source, go right to the standard, and look under these requirements. When it pertains to ISO 9001 calibration requirements, again, they are under section 7.1.5.1 and 7.1.5.2. Should you have any questions concerning these, feel free to leave a comment on this in this video itself, or if you're watching this video on the blog post, you can always reply at the very bottom of the article. If you ask me a question in the comments section, I will generally answer those questions within 24 hours. So this is Ralph Martin signing out. You make it a great day.